You know, I never thought I wanted or needed a horror trilogy where I get to see something every week until I got one. But Fear Street, turns out I'm a fan. Hello, everyone. Terrence here with Hollywood Already Did It. If you haven't already, go ahead, like, share, subscribe to the channel, ring that bell below. Anytime we have something, you will be among the first to know. You know, I've never really read too many of the R.L. Stine stuff. I'm familiar who he is and I'm familiar with his work, basically off of Goosebumps. So I always lean to thinking that name falls into the more kiddie form of horror and kiddie more form of stuff. I'm like, I don't really care or want to see that. So, but when I heard that this was a trilogy, I was intrigued to just see how it was going to be pulled off, to see three different films that are sort of intertwined and have a running thread throughout them. So, all right, Netflix, I'm at home, pop it on, watch Fear Street, 1994, which I always am sort of a love when things start going back to the 90s, start doing that, which this movie does a really good job of sort of recreating the feel of that era, being in a mall. The opening sequence of this movie does one of those things that a lot of those 90s slasher films, like I Know What You Did Last Summer or Scream, do, where you have a cold open of a death, of a murder. And so this definitely opens up and what you're like, oh, this is cool. And then all of a sudden, just pandemonium breaks. And it's a really intense opening sequence. That is just sort of the breadcrumbs to start what we get for the rest of the story. Scream's probably one of the better known cold opens where with Drew Barrymore. So you get something of that essence here. And then the story just sort of takes off. So after the cold open, we are led into a story that takes place in Shadyside with two teenage girls, Dina and Sam, who are former lovers, which is always cool to sort of see a young adult, young, multiple layers here, young adults, female, sexually spectrum, because Sam's not a lesbian. She seems to be bisexual. So sexually spectrum and people of color. So it's just layer on top of layer on layer for the leads, which is dope to see in a mainstream horror film. But those two are getting into a situation where they get a little bit in under their over their heads and have to start dealing with witches, spirits, and old curses. And so calamity ensues in Shadyside with them and the dealings with their friends. And this big slasher slash who are they after type of situation, like what is this witch trying to do? What is the spirit or story trying to tell? And we come to a pretty. It's fun. The ride to get there is fun. It becomes sort of a very young adult, very almost. I felt more like Clue or Scream 3ish, where you're kind of trying to figure out the pieces of why this is happening. What is it that this spirit or these spirits are looking for, and how do we go about uh, fixing that or getting out of the situation? And so, calamity ensues. I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but there are some decisions made that have to affect each of the team members, and they sort of say, can is the love that the two leads have, Dina and Sam, um, important enough and strong enough to justify going through these perils when we may not have to. I said at the top how I thought these were kid films like Goosebumps. I remember being very family friendly and kids. This ain't it. This is violent as shit, and I love it. There are some pretty intense deaths and violence, and it gets pretty gruesome there. There is a situation with a bread slicer that will always haunt me and be one of my favorite scenes that I have seen in quite some time. You just say bread slicer, it gets around anybody who's seen this movie, they're like, ooh, oh damn. It's really well done. I think there is a connection that the two leads have that when it is all said and done, the story feels like it has earned the right to have them be where they're at. Feels like it has a good resolution to the story arc that we basically started from the jump of this with the two of them and sort of end where we do. And even how it carrots and twists before it goes just batshit. You're like, oh, this is how I get sucked into coming back. So I'm going to watch this next part when it comes out the following week, which in this case, I watched Fear 1994 last Friday. I just haven't been able to do a review till now. So as soon as I get done with here and I get this all edited, I'm going to go watch Part 2, which is out now, and I'll put that up shortly thereafter, because I sort of dig this week to week thing. It gives me something to look forward to. I know we are very much in this give everything to me now world, but I like this concept of making it water cooler talk. I think you build up an audience and then you hit them. Now, granted, you have to be good each time, but stuff like the Marvel series and Star Wars, where you're doing it week to week, you sort of get the buzz back up and you're talking it up, so that I think Fear Street as it goes along. Because if this are all released at once, people would have consumed it and it'd be out with the bathwater. I think this allows it to sort of swell, so that when we get the final film in the subsequent week, I think it'll be an overall well done and well told story that puts it in a place. What's going to be interesting, though, is the timing of the decades of whichever these takes place. 90s is a very tangible world. There are a lot of people watching this that feel that. When we start going back into the past and you do with the 70s, there's going to be some people that are watching this, but it's a very different style of horror in that point. And I wonder if this series is going to feel authentic to the era of horror that their decade is in. 90s was very much the Scream, I Know What You Did Last Summer, slasher type stuff, whereas I think the 70s would lean itself more, because I think that's sort of the era that, even though the films came out all the way up till the 90s and beyond, but that was Friday the 13th type of film, especially being at a camp. It feels like that leans itself more to Jason and being Friday the 13th. So if it feels more like that, where if you have sex, you're dying, that type of stuff, then I'm going to be in for that too. And then the final year is 1666, so they're going to deal with some witches. That might be the hardest one, I think, for them to pay off for me, because it's just an era when we get that far back and we start dealing with witches and stuff and get supernatural. I don't know if that is a film or an audience that I'm actually going to particularly care too much for. But hopefully by that point in time, they have earned from 94 to 70 to that one. They have sort of earned the right for me to continue on, and my inability to sort of connect to 1666 is lessened because of all the groundwork that has been laid so far. But how do you guys feel about Fear Street 1994, and are you excited to continue on this ride and like the way that they are releasing these? Go ahead and leave your comments and your thoughts in the comments below. If you haven't already, you can follow us on Twitter at HollywoodADI. You can hit us up on email at HollywoodAlreadyDidIt@gmail.com. We also have a podcast with the same name that's on Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, any other place podcast. We're there. We're currently doing, this week we're going to be talking about Black Widow and Marvel Cinematic Universe and all that good stuff. And we are having our Marvel pair-up episodes where we talk with our guest host, Jamie Jurek, and we're discussing Loki and a time-traveling movie to sort of compare it to and talk about time travel and all that good stuff. So you can find that also wherever podcasts are played and here on YouTube. But like always, I got my ticket. You got yours.